Hello and welcome to another episode of the WTI Talks. This time, we have the pleasure and honor of hosting once again Mr. Fernando Hernandez, who is the chairman of the Society for Low Carbon Technologies, an award-winning mentor and technologist, and the business ambassador to Scotland. He was here last year as well, and we discussed smog and smog diplomacy. And it turns out, unfortunately, all of it came true, and we suffered from one of the worst smog crises in the world. And even right now, Pakistan's air quality remains highly questionable. So, Mr. Hernandez, first of all, let me welcome you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Shukriya. Thanks for having me.
Lovely. And as we all know that even the CSS students, the AI/technology and energy, both of these tend to be really important themes when we prepare for your current affairs, your Pakistan affairs, your essay, and even otherwise, all of those who are watching, apart from being an aspirant or preparing for an examination, these are the themes, the aspects that really concern each and every citizen of this country and also the globe. So today, as we have you here with us, Mr. Hernandez, I would like to take the opportunity to, first of all, ask that what really is, because most of us, we don't really understand, is there even a relation between AI and the use of energy? Like, would you like to enlighten us in this regard?
1000%. You know, this goes back to the year 1712, but we're in 2025, so we'll start at 2025. So coal was what drove the Industrial Revolution. Electricity and electrons will be what moves forward the AI revolution. So there's a deep correlation between AI and energy.
All right. And like we were discussing before the podcast, you mentioned a very interesting statistic about the use of AI and how it is really useful in glacier mapping. And then it goes on to a very, very interesting and relevant stream of thought. Can you please enlighten us in this regard?
Yeah, so very recent data came out from Europe where you're able to do glacier mapping at 10,000 times faster by using AI than a human would. But the paradox of AI's efficiencies is the following, that you need energy to do this glacier mapping. So in essence, there isn't a major city that's running on fully renewables that's over 4 million. It just doesn't exist. So data centers, in many respects, have to rely on different forms of energy. That can be natural gas. Obviously, when you use natural gas, you emit CO2, and that has an impact on glaciers. So if we bring it all back together, are the people that are mapping for glaciers contributing to these glaciers being affected by emissions? Because every time you use AI, you're using electricity. So I'll give you a quick data point, and we'll come back to this. A normal Google query versus let's say a ChatGPT query is a 10x, using 10 times the amount of energy. So again, that's the paradox. You're mapping glaciers much more fastly, but at the same time, you're creating more emissions from that energy. Because I come back to what drove the Industrial Revolution was coal, and in this case, it'll be electricity. And it's an existential reality, because without this electricity, there is no AI. AI is incapable of creating its own electricity. I'll repeat that again for abundantly and clear measure. AI cannot create its own electricity.
And then therein lies this dilemma where, as you said, like people who are working to improve like the environment, mapping the glaciers, but at the same time, if they're using AI for that, they might also be contributing towards factors that might negatively affect the environment, right?
That is correct. And that spans through the Pakistani populace, through the global populace, because if we look at ChatGPT, the way that powerhouse in terms of subscriptions came on continues to increase. So it's been, we could say, democratized, whereby people with mobile phones can get this information and start to get on ChatGPT. And that's empowering, but is it empowering our biosphere?
Yeah.
Is it empowering having less emissions? It's rhetorical, but I think we know the answer.
Okay, and in this regard, you mentioned something really interesting, and I'd like to connect the dots. Why does the year 1712 matters? Like, we're talking about Quran 2025, and it's very interesting to have this historical perspective to this.
Yeah, well, it is very interesting because when we look at coal, for it to grow and create the first energy transition, you needed to have a coal engine that could pump out the water. What do I mean by that? So in London, or we can just say UK more broadly speaking, we know it rains, right? So when you have this rain and you go deeper into coal mines and you start to go lateral, they start to flood. So when it's a hindrance to being able to extract coal in a very efficient way. Now then, artificial intelligence is doing the same. But I'll just speak about the coal engine. The coal engine was able to pop out, or let's just say remove the water so that you can continue to operate. So you had that operational capability, but it was self-serving ecosystem for its own existential survival. Otherwise, the coal industry and the industrial revolution could look very differently. Now with AI, you're seeing the same ecosystem. So we look at the actual founder of ChatGPT, has investments in nuclear, solar, all of the above, in certain regards, energy, clean tech investments. Not entirely all of the above, but when you start to look at other companies, they are making investments in geothermal. ExxonMobil is now going to become a power player to provide power, and some of this will be going to data centers. So by that logic, why did 1712 matter? That coal engine allowed for the growth of the coal industry. Now we look at AI. AI needs that electricity, or it's going to put too much demand and it's going to shock the grid. So AI companies are following the same train of thought, or the same logical sequential steps, that they need to create their own ecosystems to continue to operate and survive. Because again, irrespective of how much people think AI is intelligent, it isn't sufficiently intelligent to create its own energy. Full stop.
It remains dependent upon this feedstock sort of a thing that we have to provide, and which brings into so many perspectives. But first of all, like most of the things that we hear about AI and energy, they try to put a spin that talks about extreme use of energy when it comes to AI, single query at AI versus Google. But do you think there is also a positive correlation or a positive image or a role that AI can play in terms of resolving this climate crisis from which countries like Pakistan suffer the most?
Absolutely. So we have to look at this from two sides of the coin. The first side is infrastructure, the second side being carbon management. So we'll start with the first side of the coin, if that's okay with you. So if you are able to understand the grid's fluidity, the user fluidity, really aggregate the information of how your grid is operating, and then you can start to increase in an iterative fashion efficiencies, ways to make the grid more resilient, ways to not be as wasteful, then that has a positive impact on the nation. It has a positive impact on the Pakistani populace, and it has a positive impact on reducing the amount of hydrocarbon extraction that's required, or energy utilization anywhere and everywhere, right? Because the best energy that's used is the one that isn't. And the best energy that is used 2.0 is the one that's used in a very effective and efficient way. So to the point of your question, AI can assist with that side of the coin, bringing these efficiencies. Secondly, the other side of the coin is the carbon management. By having a better understanding of your grid and understanding of where emissions may be, you can start to become more informed. And that really can position Pakistan and other nations to be data-driven leaders using iterative, or just let's call it artificial intelligence, to assist with that decision-making process.
Wow. Okay.
Right? Because I do believe in the symbiosis of man and machine, not man versus machine, or let's just say humankind with machine. And by having that equilibrium, you can get the best of both worlds.
Okay, and this is actually a nice segue into my next question, which was like, for instance, countries like Pakistan, we being mindful of the fact that we face certain issues, and above all, I believe in any endeavor, which is the access to funding. We don't have that right now. But despite that, do you think that Pakistan can make use or grab this opportunity of this wide trend of data centers and AI, and maybe nuclear, and can we connect all of these together?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you why. So when we look at Pakistan has nuclear capabilities. Now, you look at the likes of Amazon. Guess what they're going after for their data centers? Nuclear. With SMRs, or known as small modular reactors. Obviously, not a politician here. I'm going to speak as an energetician. So we have to start with that to really fulfill and complete the equation. So given that Pakistan does have an understanding of nuclear, then we go to the next step, right? Incremental. Go to small modular reactors. And now you can provide data centers with a very low carbon electricity that bypasses intermittency, right? The cliche, no wind, no turbine spinning, no sun, no solar working. Nuclear is very, very, very different than that. And Amazon Web Services knows this, Google as well. They've acquired a certain data center that allows them to have exclusive, or I could say in large part, exclusivity to those electrons coming from nuclear. So this was all really just really taking off last year. So if we step into this year, all things being equal, why wouldn't Pakistan in a situation be positioning itself to use SMR technology to power data centers? But what does that really mean? That means economic growth. That means diversification in the economy, positive GDP impact that is low carbon. And above all, and we mentioned this in a previous podcast, is upskilling the youth with new talents and new ways and modes of thinking. So in many ways, Pakistan is uniquely positioned to fulfill that AI equation when we look at what can be done with the now for the future.
Wow. And also a follow-up question, you being the energetician, I really like the term because it speaks about the core of this conversation. What do you think might be the factors that would hinder such a move, or such a move to grab this wonderful opportunity that is happening across the world? And what will make companies like Amazon and Microsoft look at Pakistan in a more favorable manner as compared to the other world?
Well, I can't speak at how they look at things favorably or otherwise. I look at all nations favorably, right? So I'll speak from that perspective, if I may. But I think what you're talking about is potentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the attraction of capital from entities from elsewhere. Yeah. I think when you have the sanctity of law, the sanctity of contracts, when those are respected, whether it's a developed or developing nations, there's always going to be headwinds. Okay. We see it all the time. I'm going to be very diplomatic. There's these flashpoints that arise, and they're blind to nations. They occur. So obviously, you do need economic stability. You do need a system that's in place that's going to protect the investment, right? Okay. Because you do need that return on investment. Otherwise, you might as well just create this hole in earth and just throw money in it. Yeah. But unless there's a framework there to protect these investments and also protect the growth of the nation, so the investor is winning as much as the Pakistani individual, but this framework can be adapted to other developing or developed nations. That'll be critical. So the nation does have to show, any nation for that matter, that there is a sanctity of law, a sanctity of contract, and a sanctity to operate. And that's more rooted in a social license to operate. So you see this a lot with energy, the social license to operate. And this comes back to AI. AI is going to face an existential crisis. The UK got rid of all its coal plants. Why? Because when coal reached 5% of the energy mix from biomass to coal, they weren't thinking with the social license to operate. And that's okay. We evolve, we learn, it's iterative. But if AI does not follow a way that is conscientious of the way it's operating and maintaining that social license to operate from a climate perspective, it'll face that existential crisis. So again, social license to operate isn't just regarding climate, but it is also regarding the social license to operate, where people in Pakistan have buy-in and say, we want data centers. We want small modular reactors. This is growth. The world is growing with AI. So in closing, Pakistan can punch really high above its weight with the SMR philosophy.
With the SMR philosophy, that's really insightful. And in terms of AI and everything, at some point needs to be regulated in a manner that is conducive to its growth and its usage as well, but also which prevents it disproportionately impacting the populace or other stakeholders. So, in terms of the regulation or the future of regulation of AI, what do you envisage? Will it be different in the developed worlds and the developing worlds, or it should be the same? There should be some energy cap use in terms of its usage. What will it look like?
I think the way that question is framed, I think there's two ways to look at it. But if there's more, I'm happy to explore those threads. On one part is the security of AI, right? And the regulation, the policy. There's some fear mongering that, AI is going to do this and the X can lead to the Y and the Z can lead to this catastrophe. But if we look at, just generally speaking, the globe, the last intentional nuclear attack in the context of war was World War II. We haven't seen that. The world has shown that it is intelligent enough to regulate itself, to have restraint, to have policy, to have multilateral relations so that these type of attacks have not happened. So if we can do that with the nuclear weapon and have that restraint, I think we have to, as humanity, have more competence and confidence of what we achieved and what we can achieve with AI in saying it is not a nuclear weapon, right? And then that's just a symbolic way to look at it, because there is some people that have, in some cases, a view that is very drastic. But we look at the nuclear weapon example, and right now there's a lot of flashpoints going on. There's been others since World War II, but yet an attack has not happened. So that's the first part. The second part, when we look at the energy cap, that is going to be a more difficult, nuanced matter, because obviously, there's that framework of how nations should work together when it comes to nuclear. But on energy, every nation has a sovereign right of how it sees its energy, how it wants to use its energy, how it wants to energy transition or transitions the plural and go low carbon. So energy caps, that will be a more micro nation by nation way to approach the AI conundrum when it comes to energy. So that's micro. And then the macro is how we're looking at the policy and regulation of AI so that these, and there is some merit to what people mention that might be on the edge of fear mongering, but there is some merit to look at those components that can create flashpoints, right? But I've just, in one simple case, one simple discussion, have given you a very definitive way that a nuclear attack has not happened since the unfortunate one of World War II.
Wow.
So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that is once again very insightful, because these topics, in order to instill critical thinking, it is very important to look at things or theories and elements from a various perspective. And this perspective, I believe, is highly understudied at the moment and underrepresented as well. And I'm actually really glad that we're discussing it. Finally, moving forward, like the future of AI regulation, but then in of itself, the topic that we started from, this confluence of AI and energy, this symbiotic relationship, this synergy, how do you see it evolving? Like you gave us a very good nugget in terms of how nuclear and SMRs can be used for this purpose, and very relevant to Pakistan in order to create job opportunities and improve GDP. And are there any other ways you're looking at it as well, like AI and energy? What will it evolve into?
Can you be more specific, like in terms of energy?
In terms of opportunities, like nuclear is something that we never thought of. Like, okay, Pakistan can play its role using SMRs, nuclear energy, to be a provider of clean energy to these data centers, which in turn would create a lot of opportunities for us. In the similar fashion, do you think of some other usages of this synergy?
Absolutely. So what you're starting to see a lot in Texas is a economic investment and this quasi boom of electric storage or battery storage.
Okay.
Because again, you don't want to squander electrons. You want to store them. So if you're producing too much, you want to be able to store that. So again, Pakistan starts to layer this intelligence of systems management in the vantage point of electricity or power production. So if you're starting to have batteries and there's an element of modularity to that, then that's really great through nuclear. But you already have, in addition to nuclear, the ability to go with hydroelectricity. So you start to add hydroelectricity, that starts to continue to get interesting. You do solar, you do wind. The reason AI is such an equalizer is because it all requires one thing. I said it earlier and I'll say it again. Coal is to the Industrial Revolution, what electricity is to the AI revolution. But as a technologist, as someone that has experience in these energy systems, not from a Bloomberg Green perspective, shout out to them, but they have their space and so does this discussion, is that electrons are electrons. So when you store them with batteries or whether you use them at data centers, wind, solar, small modular reactors, and hydroelectricity are all singular because they use that common thread of the electron. And then you start to do battery storage. And now, if you create an abundance of electricity, you can start to create a much greener grid that is decentralized from the centralized grid that exists in Pakistan today. So therefore, you can start to create energy companies, not oil companies.
Energy companies.
Energy companies that focus on the energy basket that takes an all of the above approach. And now the grid is decentralized. It allows for microgrids to exist. So again, if there's hospitals that during load shedding, there's not enough electricity, they should be prioritized. Human life should always be prioritized. The infants that may not have the electricity to have their hearts monitored during surgery need that. And now this adds a layer of redundancy, positive contingency, and also is upskilling people to think in these ways to innovate, elevate, and impact change.
That, from this is very great, because from a macroeconomy perspective, what I was thinking, so this also feeds into resolving one of the worst energy crises that Pakistan is facing right now. As we were discussing yesterday, we actually squander the energy that we produce, electricity that we produce. And the electricity consumption has also actually gone down 16 to 20% year on year, and the capacity payments and IPPs. And from an economy point of view, the resource allocation always has to be very productive. And in this way, what you're referring to is that all of that electricity that is now squandered can be used to build batteries, which can, so this all makes sense. It has a certain circularity to it, which closes the loop. And it's brilliant.
And if I may, thank you for that pronounced feedback. It's almost like when you have a backup generator at restaurants or at a hospital, those kick in. So now if you can imagine this grid and having extra storage batteries, when there's load shedding, they can kick in. Now we tied with the overarching theme of AI, artificial intelligence, where you can do predictive analysis, predictive modeling, be able to understand where these items that are causing the grid to trip. You're now adding a layer of intelligence by way of always making sure it's human and machine-based symbiosis, right? And now, instead of having that generator that's running on fuel, hydrocarbon-based, you can now apply that same philosophy. We have that empirical evidence. We have that empirical example. You do it with battery storage, whether, again, nuclear, solar, wind, or hydro, electricity, it doesn't matter. They have that common thread, which is what makes them very beautiful, because if you look at coal, oil, and natural gas, all of those three require different infrastructure. Electrons require copper.
Yeah.
One thread.
One conduit.
One conduit.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Hernandez. I think, and we touched upon a lot of themes that we will be discussing in the next podcast as well. Energy security, and so thank you so much for your time today. And I believe this was very insightful and with some very pragmatic insights that can be used by students and policymakers both.
Yeah, and absolutely. Just a quick thing to note, as you know, we did sign the Society for Low Carbon Technologies with the WTI, the first low carbon agreement. And the recipient of the scholarship that we offered is rooted in having actionable change agents to these discussions. So whatever camera is looking at me, we are not just talking as talking heads. We're talking as change agents. We're talking to invest in this nation. We're talking to invest in the future and present generation as we have already done. I met the amazing student that was the recipient of the scholarship. We will proliferate that and we will increase that. And with that, I digress. But change is upon us and change is in the hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very well said, Mr. Hernandez. Thank you so much for your time.